It is generally known that, especially in the past, many tribes in Africa have put great importance into the rituals and practice of sacrifice. The Kikuyu tribe in Kenya, the tribe which our myth today originates from, was no different. Generally, the sacrifices were of animals, most commonly sheep, though the animal and color of said animal did depend on the reason for the sacrifice taking place. Sacrifices took place for big occasions, such as planting and harvesting times, coming-of-age rituals, and, as relevant to our tale, when rains were delayed, or when rains failed altogether. Though humans were not sacrificed in the Kikuyu tribe, some of their close relative tribes did, however rarely, practice human sacrifice until the early 20th century. The reason behind sacrifice was to please the gods, or to thank them, so that they would bring to the people things that they needed. Only the best or most appropriate gifts pertaining to the ritual would do. This is why, in our myth today, Wanjiru was chosen. Amongst the remaining members of the Kikuyu tribe, there is a legend told of the woman named Wanjiru. She was a woman yet unmarried, not due to any lack of desirability, but because of that desirability itself. A woman so beautiful and so blessed with a hard-working demeanor could have the pick of any man she wanted, and so even the great warriors feared to approach her, lest she dismiss them and cause them humiliation in front of the entire tribe. She worked when some others might instead lull to gossip, and had never been known to dismiss a person out of hand, or to ignore someone who wanted or needed her attention. She worked to plant and harvest crops, even when the rains would not come. It had been one such period of time, when the rains refused to fall for 3 years, that a few industrious young men undertook a journey to their village's medicine man. They approached him where he had set up his home, just outside of the great open space atop the hill where the village gathered to dance at times of celebration, an area that was increasingly abandoned as time passed, there being less and less to celebrate. When he allowed them to approach, they rushed forward, clamoring over each other. "Why does the rain not come?" they asked. "We shall die of hunger if our crops are allowed to fail for 1 more year." The medicine man nodded wisely and sat, uncapping the gourd he wore on his back and shaking it gently as he stared into the contents, as if staring at the long distant horizon. And he began to pour the contents onto the ground and repack them, over and over, and as he did so, he spoke. "I cannot tell you why the gods have decided to judge us as they have. No man may know their ways. Instead, I will tell you how our wrongs may be remedied, that the rains may come." He poured the contents of his gourd onto the ground one last time, and a look of sorrow crossed his face as he examined how each item lay. Finally, he looked up at the jostling, eager young men, and to them he said, "If the rain is to fall, one maiden must be brought to this place, she by the name of Wanjiru. Bring her here, and the rest of the village with you, the day after tomorrow, and let each of you, from the very youngest to the eldest, bring with you a goat as a bride price." The men returned to the village and soberly approached Wanjiru's family. To them, and to Wanjiru, they spoke. The medicine man had called, they said, for a gathering, of which Wanjiru was to be the one honored. Wanjiru looked up from her youngest sister, whom she was cleaning, and smiled. "I cannot imagine what I have done to deserve this, but of course I will come, and all of my family with me." 2 days later, Wanjiru and her family went to the great open space atop the hill. The rest of the village was already there, a goat in each man's arms, and they tore her away from her family's side, pushing her into the center of the great circle. Her family joined the circle, and as they watched, her feet began to sink into the ground as if it were soft mulch instead of hard stone. Wanjiru cried out, frightened, and reached her hands out to the villagers, but they would not help. Her mother and father made to rush forward, but the villagers closest to them pushed into their arms a goat each, and they hesitated. Wanjiru sank in up to her knees, and again she cried out. "I am lost!" she wailed, seeing and understanding the stony gazes of the people around her. Her mother turned her face away, and her father cried out as well, an echo of her voice. Wanjiru sank to her hips, and she struggled, pushing at the ground with her hands. "I am lost! But you have nothing to fear, for much rain will come," she said, her voice full of spite. Many of those around her flinched, unused to such cruelty from her. The medicine man entered the circle, kneeling and placing a hand atop her head. "It was the only way," he said. The sky became dark and clouded, but the air remained dry, and the villagers began to shift, uncertain and wondering. Much rain will come, Wanjiru stated again, staring steadfastly at the medicine man as she was encased in earth to her breast, and several of her family members began to rush forward, their nerves shattering under the pressure of watching her slowly be consumed by the earth. Each one of them was met by another villager, pressing a goat into their arms and herding them back into the circle. As the dry earth reached Wanjiru's neck, the clouds finally burst, spilling rain in large droplets upon the earth, and the people, and Wanjiru. The water mingled with her tears as she whispered, "My own people have undone me," and gave a last bitter smile, before the earth encased her fully, rippling smooth and solid beneath the medicine man's fingers. The rain released fully upon the people, and they quickly departed, running for the village and the safety of their homes. Only one stayed behind, a young warrior who had been in love with Wanjiru, but like the others had said nothing. He sat down on the spot Wanjiru had disappeared, and lamented in loud, raucous cries. He stayed until the medicine man had gone, and the rain had gone and come again, and then he returned to his mother's house, weeping. She asked what the matter was upon such a day. The return of rain was a thing for which they should be celebrating. "Wanjiru is lost, and her own people gave her away," he said, turning his face away from her, ashamed for his own part in the act. As the weeks passed, the warrior continued to lament, wandering the village and accomplishing nothing except keeping her memory fresh, for himself and the others, until one day he woke up and said to himself, "Where has she gone? Wherever it is, I will go there too." He took up his shield and his spear, and made the trek to the great open space atop the hill. He stood atop the spot she had stood, and as his feet began to sink, he began to feel the same terror she had no doubt felt. He sank into the ground far quicker than had she, and found himself fallen on a long, dark road that stank of rotting flesh. The dark was so black it hurt his eyes, and there was no water or food to be found, though he was hungry and thirsty regardless. For what felt like days he wandered, calling her name. "Wanjiru! Wanjiru, where have you gone?" But he did not find her, for she had been there much longer than he, and had wandered much farther afield. It took him several weeks, and he found her on the ground far away from where he had come through. She was thin, eyes wide and sunken into her face, lips dry and cracked, her tongue and throat so dry that when she opened her mouth to speak, only a croak came out. "Oh, Wanjiru," he said, and he knelt and put her upon his back as if he were carrying a child. "You were sacrificed to bring the rain, and could not come back of your own will lest the rains be taken away again. But now the rains have come, and you have shown your willingness to stay, so I will bring you back." He carried her back along the road he had traveled, sharing with her the little water he had brought. When they arrived at the spot where they had come through, he climbed to the top of the passage, and with his hands and his sword he dug a hole to the surface. When they reached the top, he pulled them out onto the solid ground, and the earth closed behind them. "I will not take you back to your family, for they have treated you shamefully," he said to Wanjiru as they came upon the village, feeling her trembling settle into stillness against his back. Instead, he took her to his mother's house after night had fallen, hiding her under a large swath of cloth that he wore like a cloak as he approached his mother. "I need your house, mother. Please leave, and do not ask me what for, and do not let anyone else in." But his mother refused, and asked why he would hide something from her, the one who bore him and raised him through illness and injury alike. Shamed, he ducked his head and pulled the cloth from over Wanjiru. "Tell no one she has returned," he insisted. His mother agreed, and so Wanjiru lived in the house of the warrior's mother. Together, the warrior and his mother fed her the sweet fat from goats, and attired her in the skin of those same goats, so that she regained her lost strength and was once more as beautiful as she had been. When the next great dance came, the warrior left with the crowd, while his mother and Wanjiru stayed behind. Only when everyone was at the dance and the streets were empty did they set out, and they arrived when the dance was already underway, slipping into the throngs and mingling with the crowd. One of Wanjiru's relatives caught sight of her and let out a great cry that surely Wanjiru, whom they had lost, had returned. Her family crowded around her, eager to greet her and welcome her back, but the warrior beat them away and protected her. "You have sold Wanjiru. She is not yours any longer," he said harshly, and returned with Wanjiru to his mother's house. But the next day they came and begged him to let them see Wanjiru. He refused, and the next day as well, and the next, but on the fourth day she approached him. "I have forgiven them their transgressions. Surely it is time that you do so as well." And the warrior repented, allowing them to see her. "For surely," he said to himself, "they feel the same guilt as I did for what we have all done." They all clamored about her, touching her face and the fine garments she wore, and apologizing profusely. The warrior's mother took aside Wanjiru's parents, and they decided that the warrior and Wanjiru would wed. And so the warrior married Wanjiru, the woman who had brought the rain.